The morning started like so many others: too much coffee, not enough food, and the steady hum of anxiety in my chest that I'd long since mistaken for motivation. I had been living on borrowed energy for months, convincing myself that every headache, every wave of dizziness, every short breath was just exhaustion I could push through. I told myself slowing down wasn't an option, not when I had deadlines to meet, bills to cover, and a family that always found ways to remind me of their needs. By noon, I was standing in front of the conference room, halfway through a presentation for one of our biggest clients. The slides blurred slightly, but I kept speaking, my voice steady even as the edges of my vision dimmed. I told myself it was just nerves, maybe dehydration. Then, as I reached for the folder on the table, the world tipped sideways. There was no graceful stumble, no time to catch myself. One moment I was upright, the next I was falling into blackness. When I opened my eyes again, it was to the sterile brightness of hospital lights and the rhythmic beeping of machines. Cold electrodes clung to my chest. An IV tugged at the crook of my arm, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. A nurse leaned over me with a calm but firm smile, adjusting the drip as she spoke. "You had a cardiac event," she said. "You're stable now. We've been monitoring you closely. You're lucky your coworkers reacted quickly and called the ambulance." I nodded faintly, the words slow to settle in. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "We reached out to your emergency contacts. Your parents were notified." Something inside me braced at that, waiting for the sound of familiar footsteps, for my mother's worried voice or my father's gruff attempt at reassurance. Hours stretched into a day, then 2. No one came. Not a call, not a text, not even a message left at the nurse's station. Lying there with the monitors tracking each beat of my fragile heart, I realized the silence from them was louder than the machines. The absence hurt more than the IV needle digging into my skin, more than the ache in my chest. And on the second night, when I reached for my phone, the screen lit up with a single notification that made the truth impossible to ignore. 2 days passed in a blur of needles, monitors, and hushed voices in the hallway. Nurses came and went, asking how I was feeling, adjusting wires that tethered me to the bed. My body felt heavy, but the silence from my family weighed more than any drip or monitor. I kept checking my phone, convincing myself that maybe the signal had dropped. Maybe there had been some mix-up at the front desk. Each time, the screen stayed empty. On the third morning, I woke from a shallow sleep to the sound of a soft chime. For a moment, my chest leapt. Maybe a message. Maybe someone had finally remembered I existed. I reached for the phone with trembling fingers and unlocked the screen. It wasn't a call. It wasn't even a text. It was a notification from Instagram. Melissa had tagged me in a photo. I opened it and felt the room tilt, even though I was lying flat. There they were, my parents, my 2 sisters, gathered around a picnic table at the lake. My mother smiling over her deviled eggs, my father holding a beer, Paige with her head thrown back in laughter, Melissa's caption in bold. Curated letters read, "Family Day without the drama." The words sliced through me sharper than any scalpel. I stared at their faces, their joy framed like a celebration, while I lay here tethered to machines they couldn't be bothered to stand beside. Not even a phone call, not a question about whether I was alive or dead. Just a photograph, tagged as if I were some inside joke. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My thumb hovered over the screen until it dimmed into blackness. In that silence, something in me shifted. Not an explosion, but a quiet fracture, the kind that doesn't scream but seals itself closed with finality. I set the phone down, my chest heavy but strangely clear, knowing deep down that a line had been drawn I could never erase. The days stretched on, marked only by the rhythm of the heart monitor and the mechanical sigh of the IV pump. I healed slowly, my body piecing itself back together, but the silence from my family remained unbroken. after the photo tag. I stopped hoping. I told myself I didn't care, though the hollow ache in my chest told me otherwise. On the fourth morning, I reached for my phone again, more out of habit than expectation. The screen lit up, and for a moment I thought it was a glitch. 74 missed calls blinked back at me, stacked one on top of the other. I scrolled through them. Dad, 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 like an endless list. Beneath them sat a single unread text. We need you. Answer immediately. No greeting, no concern. Not a single word about what had happened to me. Just urgency, stripped of context, like I was nothing more than an emergency hotline they couldn't get through. I read it 3 times, waiting for something to shift inside me, for panic, for guilt, for the instinct to grab the phone and call back. But there was only a strange stillness, the kind of clarity that comes after too many storms. The rage came first, sharp, bright, filling every vein. Then it burned itself out as quickly as it had arrived, leaving only a calm, cold understanding. They hadn't come to the hospital because my body had collapsed. They hadn't called because they worried I might not wake up. They called now because something was falling apart for them. I placed the phone face down on the table, the vibration still humming against the surface as new calls poured in. I didn't pick up. I couldn't. The truth was too clear now, and it sat heavier than any monitor could measure. I turned toward the window, the sunlight spilling across the floor, and thought of the one number I hadn't dared to dial in months. My father's text still glowed on the screen, cold and sharp, when I set the phone aside and scrolled through my contacts. My finger hovered over the names I never called anymore, then stopped at one I had left untouched for months. Gramps. I almost closed it. Shame, pride, and old embarrassment tangled together. But before I could overthink, I pressed dial. He answered on the second ring. Elowin. His voice carried no hesitation, no irritation at the silence I'd kept between us, only concern. I told him where I was, the words catching in my throat. He didn't ask for details. He didn't demand explanations. He simply said, I'll be there. Less than an hour later, he walked into the room. Same windbreaker, same watch I remembered from childhood, same steady presence that always seemed unshakable. He looked at me, really looked, and said, So they finally broke you too? Huh, I couldn't even form an answer. I just nodded. The nurse returned with paperwork for another round of tests. Insurance had rejected part of it. Before I could protest, Gramps reached for his wallet and signed without blinking. He didn't make a show of it, didn't lecture me. He just handled it, as if my well-being mattered more than the cost. Then he pulled out a small notepad. Tell me about your bills, he said. All of them. I hesitated, but under his steady gaze, I began listing them, one by one. The hidden details spilled out: the transfers to Melissa, the rent payments for Paige, the car insurance for Mom, the loan I never signed but somehow carried. Each confession left me more drained than the last. He didn't react with shock. He only made a quiet sound in his throat. Disappointment mixed with confirmation, and kept writing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like a background character in someone else's family story. I felt seen, as if my exhaustion wasn't weakness but evidence of how much I'd carried alone. When he closed the notepad, he said simply, Then we start cutting. And I knew this was only the beginning. Gramps brought my laptop from the corner of the room, setting it gently on the tray table across my lap. Let's see what they've got you tangled in, he said, flipping it open like a man about to fix a broken engine. I logged in, every click heavy with the weight of secrets I hadn't wanted to face. The spreadsheets, bank statements, and transaction histories glared back at me. It was all there, neatly organized yet quietly bleeding me dry. Gramps leaned closer, his pen tapping against the notepad he'd carried since arriving. The first was a recurring transfer to Melissa, $200 every other week, disguised as emergency help. Gramps raised his eyebrows but didn't comment, just scribbled the figure down. The next line showed monthly rent for Paige's apartment, pulled directly from my account. Then my mother's car insurance premium, charged like clockwork. And then the loan. A personal loan with my name stamped across the top, something I had never applied for. Never agreed to. Melissa's. No doubt. The payments were drafted automatically, draining a chunk of every paycheck. My stomach clenched as I scrolled through the numbers, realizing just how deeply I had let them root themselves into my life. My hands trembled as I began shutting them off one by one. Cancel transfer, remove payment method, change password. Each confirmation window felt like breaking a chain link, small clicks echoing louder than the hospital machines around me. By the time I finished, my body sagged against the pillows, drained but lighter. I looked at the screen, the cleared-out debits, the sudden silence of obligations I had carried like second skin. For years, I thought supporting them was proof of love, proof of loyalty. But the truth glared back at me in black and white. I wasn't a daughter or a sister to them. I was infrastructure. I was a system that kept running until it broke. Gramps closed the laptop, his hand resting on top of mine for just a moment. No lecture, no judgment, just quiet confirmation. And as the hospital settled into evening silence, my phone lit up with the first angry message. The first message arrived before midnight. Melissa sent a screenshot of her checking account. The balance sitting at $29, followed by, "What the hell is going on?" "Fix this." I stared at it, numb, before locking the screen. By morning, my voicemail box was full. Paige's voice cracked with rehearsed sorrow. "Please don't punish me for things I didn't do. I love you. I want peace." Her words were sugar laced with accusation. Dad's tone was sharper, impatient. "This isn't the way to handle family matters. You need to call me back immediately." It wasn't concern, it was command. Then my mother's message, calm and clipped Elowen. I just heard what happened. "Call me when you can," as if she hadn't known for days, as if my collapse had been gossip passed to her in a grocery aisle. The texts kept piling in. Melissa's demands grew bolder. Paige shifted into long paragraphs about forgiveness. Dad called back to back, his name flashing across the screen until I had to flip the phone over to stop seeing it. When I was discharged, Gramps drove me home. The relief of my own apartment lasted only seconds. Through the blinds, I saw headlights idling outside. My father's car. He didn't come up, didn't knock. He just sat there, the engine humming like a warning. I turned off the lights and sank into the couch, every nerve tight with dread. The phone vibrated again on the table, its glow cutting across the dark room. I silenced it without looking. For the first time, I felt the full weight of what I had done cutting them off, severing ties they thought unbreakable. Fear pressed against my chest, but beneath it, something steadier pulsed. Resolve. And as the night deepened, Gramps' words echoed, "Once you start cutting, you can't stop halfway." A week after I was discharged, Gramps showed up at my apartment with a manila envelope tucked under his arm. He didn't sit right away, just handed it to me with a heaviness in his eyes. "You need to see this," he said. Inside were printed emails and draft filings from a law office I'd never heard of. My parents' names were all over them. The words blurred for a moment, but then sharpened petition for emergency conservatorship. They were claiming I was mentally unstable after the collapse, that I was erratic, incapable of managing finances, in need of temporary guardianship. My father was listed as the preferred conservator. The air went cold in my chest. Silence had cut me. Indifference had hollowed me out. But this was theft of something deeper. They weren't content with my money. They wanted my autonomy, my voice, the right to decide who I was. Gramps sat across from me, his hands folded, "They've done this before," he said quietly, "years ago, when your uncle tried to pull away. It didn't work then, and it won't now. But you need to act fast." He had already arranged a lawyer. By that evening, the attorney was in my living room with a stack of counter documents. We filed a preemptive response notarized letters from my doctors confirming I was fully competent. Employment verification proving I had voluntarily taken leave. Financial records showing deliberate action, not instability. It never even made it to court. Their lawyer withdrew, likely realizing he had been sold a family sob story too flimsy to defend. When the news came through, I didn't feel triumph. I felt hollow, like a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. The people who gave me life had tried to erase the person living it. I closed the envelope and set it aside. But the weight of it pressed deeper than paper ever could, and I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the next act. It didn't take long for the smear campaign to start. Melissa was first, posting a shaky video with red eyes and no makeup, her voice trembling as she talked about how hard it was to watch a sibling turn against the people who raised her. Paige followed with a polished version, soft lighting, piano music in the background saying I was hurting the family and that they were only trying to help me through my dark time. The sympathy rolled in fast. Comments flooded their pages, people praising their strength, praying for unity, calling me selfish without ever hearing my name. For a moment, I wondered if maybe they'd won. They had always been good at playing the part, and the internet loves a tragedy with pretty faces. Then the cracks began to show. Someone dug up Melissa's old Instagram post, Family Day Without the Drama, the one she tagged me in while I was still lying in a hospital bed. Screenshots spread, side by side with her crying video. And the tide shifted. People began asking questions. More old posts resurfaced Paige's tweets about moochers who fake trauma. My mother's smiling dinner photo taken the night I collapsed. The story they built crumbled under its own contradictions. Within weeks, the fallout hit. Paige's boutique was flooded with refund demands until she shut down her website. Melissa's sponsors cut ties, releasing statements about misalignment of values. And my father, once so proud of his reputation at work, was placed on leave after a client forwarded the viral thread to HR. Their image, the weapon they had always sharpened against me, lay shattered. And as I watched from the quiet of my apartment, I realized they were running out of shields to hide behind. I should have expected another move, but even then, the performance stunned me. A photo appeared online, my parents, Melissa, and Paige standing outside the old house with downcast faces, arms linked like survivors of a storm. The caption read, "We forgive her. Family is forever. Forgiveness." The word hit me like a slap. They had abandoned me in a hospital bed, mocked me in public, tried to steal my autonomy in court, and now they positioned themselves as merciful saints, ready to welcome me back if only I repented. Days later, a letter arrived. My father's handwriting scrawled across the final page of a freshly drafted will. Everything, it said, would pass to the family members who maintained unity. I was officially disinherited until I returned and reconciled. For a long moment, I just stared at the paper. Years ago, it might have crushed me, the ultimate rejection. But now, the sound that came out of me wasn't a sob. It was laughter low, startled, and then rising until I had to set the letter down. I had never wanted their money. I had only ever wanted to matter. Gramps' lawyer came the next morning. Together, we drafted a legal waiver of claim to the estate. We added a permanent no-contact order, removing every family member as emergency contact or next of kin. Every signature was a line cut clean. Every initial another cord severed. When I was done, I pressed the pen into the desk and exhaled. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like the first time my life truly belonged to me. 2 weeks later, I packed my bags, and Gramps and I drove toward the mountains. The mountains rose before us like a promise, their slopes wrapped in quiet green. Gramps drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on a thermos of coffee. The same calm presence he had been through every storm. By the time we reached the cabin, the air felt lighter, as though the weight I had carried all my life couldn't follow me this far. We settled into a rhythm that belonged only to us. I took a remote job with flexible hours, nothing like the frantic schedule that had once ruled me. My mornings were slow coffee on the porch, a book open across my lap, silence broken only by the wind in the trees. Afternoons sometimes meant a hike along narrow trails where the world stretched wide and indifferent, reminding me how small the chaos behind me really was. Every so often, my phone would buzz with a message from the past, a cousin asking what really happened, an old neighbor forwarding a link to some rumor my sister still spun online. I never explained. Let them tell their stories. Let them cling to the versions where I was cruel and ungrateful. I no longer needed to defend myself against their lies. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the cabin filled with gold, I closed my book and whispered aloud, "The truth I had waited too long to claim peace is better than being loved only when you're useful."